All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Uncommon News. Today we have a special investigation on environmental warfare, different types of environmental warfare. Some of the topics that we're going to be talking about and we're going to be diving into and researching today are cloud seeding, triggering a storm cell, simulated weather, man-made droughts, heating the ionosphere, jamming sensors and communication equipment like satellites and radios, underground imaging from space and from ground-based radars, neurological suppression, so suppressing brain activity of human beings, triggering earthquakes, and intensifying storms. We're going to be diving into some of the history surrounding these concepts, some of the technology that has been around for a long time, and some of the experiments that have been ongoing since the early 50s. And what I'm going to do basically today is show you some source material that I gathered on the internet, and I'll let you decide what you believe surrounding these topics. I'll provide source links in the description box below. So go ahead and check that out, stand by for today's episode. Sorry, I got somebody outside my apartment just walking around. Okay, so without further ado, let's just get right into it. All right, like always, we start with a verse of the day. All right, today's verse of the day is Mark 6:34. It says, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So He began teaching them many things." All right, so hopefully today we'll be learning many things today. So hopefully that is relevant to today's video. All right, so the first source that we're going to be talking about today was released by the CIA. It's a congressional record that was released by the CIA. It was formerly classified. It was released 2004, August 25th, and this is basically a congressional record from 1956 on a congressional hearing. So the entire conversation is recorded here in this document. It's about 10 pages long. I'm just going to show you a couple points here. I gotta minimize the webcam here so that I can show you these things. So if you go to this link right here, and then you type in weather, it'll pull up a couple of these different spots here about weather modification. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and toggle the full screen so you can. And what I'll do is I'll briefly read from this record here, and then we'll move on to the next one because I just don't have enough time to read everything. So, the presiding officer, is there any objection to the present consideration of the report? There being no objection, the Senate proceeded to consider the report. Mr. Case of South Dakota, Mr. President, I desire to ask the distinguished senator from Arizona, the chairman of the committee, whether the conference report includes agreement by the House of Representatives to the provision for the advisory committee on weather control, which provision was inserted in the bill by the Senate. Mr. Hayden, yes, that was agreed to. Mr. Case of South Dakota, Mr. President, this item was not included in the bill at the time when it was passed by the House of Representatives because at the time the President had not assigned the bill extending the life of the Advisory Committee on Weather Control. I recognize the lateness of the hour and I shall not detain the Senate, but I wish to say that when history is written, I think the work of the Advisory Committee on Weather Control and the value of the experiments on modification of clouds will be considered among the most important results from the tasks authorized by this Congress. I may say that I have before me a paper by Captain Howard T. Orville, chairman of the committee, presented by him at a conference on weather control held just a few days ago in the state of South Dakota. By invitation of Governor Joe Foss, I ask unanimous consent that the statement by the chairman of the advisory committee be inserted at this point in the record. There being no objection, the statement was ordered to be printed in the record as follows. Advisory Committee on Weather Control by this is the advisory on weather control. Gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure for the task force of the Advisory Committee on Weather Control to meet with the distinguished gentleman from South Dakota, headed by His Excellency Governor Joe Foss. We sincerely hope when this day is over, you will all have a better understanding of what is meant by cloud seeding experiments. You will have a deeper appreciation of the capabilities and limitation of present cloud seeding techniques, and even more important, the great difficulties in determining exactly what effects have been obtained when cloud seeding experiments are carried out. You will note that I have used the term experiments in connection with the cloud seeding. The use of this term is intentional to emphasize the fact that there is still much to be learned about cloud seeding and how to determine what results, if any, have been obtained when the cloud seeding experiments are conducted over an area. It may seem strange to some of you that even the present techniques of creating precipitation artificially were first discovered almost 10 years ago. There are still many questions remaining to be answered, and because so many of the answers are unknown, the whole question of weather modification using present scientific techniques is still controversial. There are many today who feel that cloud seeding, now remember this is back in 1956, there are many today who feel that cloud seeding can completely modify the weather and that the day of absolute weather control is on the horizon. The day of absolute weather control is on the horizon. There are many more, and probably most of us here today are in this classification, who take the more conservative view that cloud seeding experiments can and do produce increases in precipitation of varying amounts under favorable weather conditions. Then, of course, there is the third group who are positively skeptics and will never accept the view that cloud seeding has any effect on the weather until they have observed repeated positive demonstrations almost with mathematical certainty. Because of the widely different opinions to the effectiveness of cloud seeding, and because of the tremendous economic importance of any method of increasing precipitation in the western drought states, Congress became interested in weather modification as early as 1948. However, it was not until 1953 that, through the efforts of your distinguished Senator Francis Case, assisted by Senators Clinton Anderson of New Mexico and Warren Magnuson of Washington, that a bill was finally passed and signed into law creating the Advisory Committee on Weather Control. This bill was signed by President Eisenhower on August 13, 1953, and created an 11-man committee to study and evaluate public and private experiments in weather modification. It is now known as Public Law 256, so you could look up Public Law 256 there. Its members consist of 5 members from private life recognized standing in the fields of science, agriculture, and business, and 6 members from interested government departments. The members from private life were appointed by President Eisenhower on December 9, 1953, and confirmed by the Senate in 1953. This 11-man committee held its first meeting in 1953. In its first meeting, the committee adopted the grounding principles to ensure that its evaluation would be impartial in all respects. These principles are: first, the committee will base its conclusions off fact. Okay, so let's scroll down here. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here to some of the experiments that they conducted. Okay, so that was what you just heard, was the formation of the weather control committee there. We're going to go ahead and go up here, and I'm going to type in supercooled stratified clouds. So you're going to see some of the technology that they were talking about back then in the 50s. Let's see if it finds it. Okay, so it looks like it found it. Super. All right. If the answers to 1 and 2 are in affirmative, okay. Up to the present time, the committee has found partial answers to 1 and 2 above, but sees no reason to recommend federal regulation at this time. Oh, okay, buddy. I'll get you a Baba. Here. I have to pause the video for just a second to get my son a bottle. I will be right back. So just bear with me. Okay, guys, welcome back. Sorry about that. When son calls, I got to respond. So, all right, I'll go ahead and get back to this. Let's see, where were we here? All right. So, up to the present time, the committee has found partial answers to 1 and 2 above, but sees no reason to recommend federal regulation at this time. It has found that supercooled stratified clouds can be dissipated by artificial seeding with dry ice or silver iodide. So what this means is that they can make it rain. They can go up and seed the clouds and make the water dissipate from the clouds. So that has been around since at least the 50s. They were talking about it in the 40s as well. So that has major implications. So that they could make it rain before the weather system reaches an area that needs the rain. So they could actually create droughts in certain areas by making the clouds dissipate before it reaches certain farmlands. Here's another one. Water seeding of warm cumulus clouds will initiate precipitation under favorable temperature and moisture conditions. Dry ice and silver iodide seeding of cumulus clouds over 5,000 feet above the freezing line and temperature at top 10 degrees Celsius will induce precipitation. Ground generator silver iodide seeding in the 3 Pacific Coast states has produced average increases in precipitation of 9% to 17% from late winter and early spring storms. These results cannot be referred to other areas or other seasons of the year. The committee hopes to find answers to flatland seeding and interior mountain areas during the next 2 years that Congress has just granted. Intensify studies of hailstorm suppression and the possibility of inhibiting lightning fires seem well justified. Captain Barry May mentioned this in his discussion of Project Skyfire this afternoon, so you guys can look up Project Skyfire. So that's another reference for you. See, each one of these reports that I'm going to show you have different things in them that you can look up, and there's a lot of different trails that you can take just from this material here. So really, what I'm doing is giving you a bunch of references here that you can look into yourself, especially if you're doing an investigation on this. And a lot of this stuff is going to tie in to HAARP. I know there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding HAARP. Some of the conspiracies are true, and I'm going to actually show you what's going on here in these later tabs here. All right. In closing, I would like to quote from a report by Assistant Secretary Anandal of the Department of Interior when he sums up the relation between cloud seeding and irrigation. While the studies to date offers hopes of some eventual increase in water supply, there is, within the present scope of scientific knowledge, little likelihood that artificial induced precipitation can ever substitute for irrigation in most of the areas now requiring irrigation. Precipitation cannot be caused when there is insufficient moisture vapor in the air. Furthermore, as far as is known now, other factors such as temperature must be favorable. And what I'm going to show you is that they can increase the temperature to actually create the precipitation. So even though they know that this is one of the limitations to cloud seeding, HAARP was actually, it's quite often referred to as a ionosphere heater. So it heats up the ionosphere. So that's one of the roadblocks that they had back then that is not really there anymore, and I'll show you that. So thus it may not always be possible to cause rain when needed for the crops. There are also times when rainfall, while needed for some crops, may bring damage or even ruin to others. And that's one of the reasons why this technology is being used for environmental warfare. They can flood crops and destroy other nations' crops, or when they're conducting experiments on this type of weapon, they're allowed to do it in the United States, and they could essentially do this and authorize the experimentation of this type of technology in the United States. So air movements are sufficiently erratic that it would be impracticable, if not completely impossible, to deposit rainfall on certain localized plots, even if the techniques develop to their maximum anticipated potential of effectiveness. The total annual rainfall in most arid areas will probably still be a fraction of that required for crops, and much of it will be at times when it cannot be fully used. Reservoirs will still be required to conserve water for use when needed, and and canals and related works will still need to convey the water to the exact spot of use. So there's quite a bit more information in this report here, or in this record here. I just really wish I had more time to read it for you guys, but unfortunately I don't. I mean, as you can see, the video has already gone up to 5 minutes, and I got so much more stuff to cover. So we're gonna end this one for now, and we're gonna move on to this NASA technical report back from 1973. So if you can see, what I'm doing is I'm going from the oldest report, and I'm working up in the years. So just keep that in mind. So the first one was from 1956, and it also made references to discussions and committees that were formed prior to that. So that's not the earliest thing that you can find out there. It's just a good reference and a good starting point. So, all right. So NASA technical report server here. So this, let me go. This is mission requirements for a manned Earth observatory, experiment selection, definition, and documentation. So this is from, let me see, from May 1973. I'm gonna go ahead and maximize this here. You can see the table of contents here. Let's see here. We go down. So if you type in weather modification up here in the search bar, you're going to get these right here. And what I want to focus in on is page 128 here. So it's weather modification experiments, and specifically tropical storms. So elements of experiment: description and definition, weather and climate modification and control, weather forecasting, severe storm phenomenology, disaster avoidance, air-sea interactions. So the experiment objective: aid in the direction of large-scale atmospheric modification experiments. So hurricane. So in parentheses here, they're trying to modify hurricanes. So evaluate the effects of modification efforts by providing intensive high-resolution, multi-sensor, multispectral measurements and visual observations prior to, during, and following hurricane modification activities. So what they're doing is they're attempting to modify hurricanes, and then they're trying to compile the results. They're trying to read the results. During the past decades, research efforts in weather modification has resulted in important achievements in the following areas: modifying the dynamics of convective clouds. Convective clouds are ones that have the potential to create thunderstorms. Okay. Numerical models have been developed that allow their use in predicting the dynamic effects of the release of latent heat from ice crystal growth initiated by seeding. So this is the seeding. So the some of the early ones that we talked about that were shown in the last reports were the silver iodide and what was it? It was ice. It was oh my gosh, I'm sorry, but they used silver iodide and dry ice. That's right. So, all right, moving on. Initial field tests using such models have already produced positive results related to the increase in heights of the tops of connective clouds that have been seeded with ice nuclei. So increasing the height of convective clouds can do many things. One, it can make the cloud dissipate its moisture sooner, and it can actually increase the intensity of the storm. So essentially they would be able to make it rain sooner than the storm normally would have, because when the moisture goes up into the air, the higher it goes in elevation, the sooner it gets cooled. So when it gets cooled, the dew point, when it reaches the dew point, it all starts to dissipate, and then it has that downward motion effect that draws the moisture up on the sides, and then when it by the rain dropping in the center, that has a pulling effect on the sides, and it makes the rain or the moisture from the sides of the storm go up, and then when it reaches that dew point all the way higher up in the atmosphere, then it falls. So once they initiate the storm, once the storm starts, it all goes down. So precipitation modification. Randomized experiments have indicated that ice nuclei seeding may, for some types of clouds and storm systems, and in some situations, lead to precipitation increases of 10 to 30%. In other situations, such seeding has either led to comparable decreases in precipitation or has had no measurable effect. The characteristics that distinguish increases from decreases seem to be linked to temperature and wind distributions, and to the stability of the cloud environment. But the full role of these characteristics influencing the effects of seeding remains to be explained. Fog dissipation. The seeding of supercool fog with dry ice, silver iodide, or liquid propane is an optional practice at several airports in the United States, USSR, and France. Dissipation appears to be successful in 60 to 80% of the cases. Since supercool fogs constitute only 5% of the fogs occurring in airports in the contemporaneous United States, increasing efforts have been aimed at dissipation of warm fogs. Success to date has been limited, and no proven practical operation method for dissipation exists. So they can dissipate fog and stuff like that. Here's information on hail suppression, modifying the dynamics of hurricanes. So widespread efforts to alleviate damage caused by hailstorms center in the introduction of seeding agents, which is large number of ice nuclei, directly into the supercool region of clouds by rockets or artillery shells. Investigators in the Soviet Union have reported notable successes over a period of years in protecting crops from destruction from hail. Results from other countries, including the United States, have been mixed. National Hail Research Experiment has been organized and will begin field operations in 1972 under the management of National Center for Atmospheric Research. Using carefully designed field experiments, this program will test the feasibility of reducing hail damage by seeding. So modifying the dynamics of hurricane. The development of hurricanes following specific modes of seeding have been simulated for simple circulatory symmetrical models. So let me read that again. The development of hurricanes following specific modes of seeding has been simulated for simple circulatory symmetrical numerical models of hurricanes. These experiments have suggested that significant effects may result from seeding. Project Storm Fury's field test. So this is a project you guys could look up right here. Project Storm Fury. Okay, so go ahead and try to find out information on that. Field test on Hurricane Debby in August 1969 indicated that decreases of maximum wind speeds of 15 to 30% followed silver iodide seeding. So they messed with Hurricane Debby, and they were able to decrease the wind speed from 15 to 30% following the injection of silver iodine into the system. Okay. Such limited results suggest the possibility of reducing damage inflicted by hurricanes and other tropical storms and possibly influencing the path taken by them. All right. So because of the great potential value of such efforts, the Committee on Atmospheric Sciences of the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, has recommended that more realistic hurricane models be developed and that further careful field tests of model predictions be carried out. So this information has been out for quite a while. I really wish I had more time to read this for you, but what I'm going to do is leave the links in the description box below, and that way you guys can go back to these reports and read the entire thing yourself. The next one that I'm going to show you here was released by DARPA, and it was an investigation into the Soviet Union's weather modification techniques and some of the technology that they had back in the 50s, I think it was. You can leave it right there, son. This report here is like straight out of Star Trek. Some of the stuff they talk about this is extremely troubling and mind-boggling at the same time. So if there's only one report that you read, I would suggest that it be this one or the next one, really, because they summarize the possibilities of weather modification and environmental warfare and using radio frequencies to heat up the ionosphere and mess with the human brain, all kinds of stuff. This report is crazy. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. Okay. So this is the Soviet developments of weather modification, climate modification, and climatology. This was sponsored by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agencies. It was released 1975. Okay. But it talks about technology that goes back into the 50s. So the key words here: weather modification, climatology, climate change, solar meteorology, environmental warfare, water diversion. So keep that in mind. Laser atmospheric sounding, cloud seeding, updraft generation. Updraft generation helps create a thunderstorm or helps create a large storm. So when you generate an updraft, you're essentially triggering, you're attempting to trigger a storm to develop or to to be generated. So downdraft generation, hail suppression, and fog dispersal. All right, so we're going to talk. What we're going to go to here is cloud seeding. So we go straight to cloud seeding here. Let me see. See if I can. Weather modification. Although effective techniques for super cool fog. Okay, let me see. Try to find out where. There's a lot of information in here, guys, and I want to try to summarize it as quickly as I can. It's a large document. I want to go over some of the main points in here. But Soviet and Western precipitation augmentation research from the 1960s to present is surveyed. Okay. So 3 basic factors influencing the effectiveness as CUS as a cloud seeding agent are discussed. All right. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's silver iodide. Improvements in 1970, the quality of the manufacture of CUS, approximately a 2-fold reduction in the optimal dosage. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Here's the chart that shows the effectiveness of different materials being used to seed clouds. So, quantity and effectiveness of seeding agents used to extinguish forest fires. In 1969 and 1971, this was in the Soviet Union. According to the combined data due to the cloud seeding operations in these regions right here that I cannot pronounce, 85 forest fires were localized and 122 fires covering a total of 175,000 hectares were extinguished. An assessment of the effectiveness of the seeding agents cited is given in the table below. According to the mean orientation figures, let's see. So they used lead iodide, silver iodide, copper sulfide. So those were the main agents that they used attempting to seed clouds and dissipate the cloud. The best cloud seeding results were obtained using copper sulfide. All right. The low efficiency coefficient for the K55 canister delivery, CUS. Okay, so CUS is copper sulfide. Sorry about that. Was due to malfunctioning of the canister explosive mechanism. The extensive application of copper sulfide in combating large-scale forest fires has been hindered by technical deficiency in the design and manufacturing of the cloud seeding delivery systems. So here we go. Now we're going to go down to, we're going to stay in this thing here and go in this document here, but we're going to type in environmental warfare, and that's going to take us to the section on environmental warfare here. So we're going to go all the way here to the end, and this is the area that is like straight out of Star Trek. Some of that crazy theories that they had back then, and they were developing on and experimenting with. So the UN General Assembly in a recent session in December 1974 approved the Soviet draft resolution calling for an international convention banning environmental warfare. The U.S. Department of Weather Warfare Indochina, a Soviet commenter, cites the large-scale destruction of roads, communications, and severe erosion of large areas of arable land during the Vietnam conflict. Reportedly, the U.S. military deployment of herbicides and firestorm defoliants destroyed the natural vegetated cover of 58,000 square kilometers of land. According to this source, the U.S. has 7 environmental warfare centers, not identified in this article, which are engaged in research and potential tactical measures such as triggering of major earthquakes by the deep injection of lubricants into vulnerable geologic faults or the generation of destructive seismic tidal waves by underwater explosions. In the same vein, the Soviet commenter alludes to the potential specter of guided tornadoes. They were talking about this stuff way back in the 70s. Guided tornadoes, simulating earthquakes or triggering earthquakes. My fault there. And tidal waves. Crazy stuff. In a similar vein, this gentleman cites the Soviet draft resolution to the UN as a latest example of Soviet disarmament efforts. The scope of the U.S. weather warfare effort in Indochina is again discussed, referring in detail to material presented at the hearing of the Subcommittee on Oceans and International Environment of U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. March. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I gotta pause that for a second.